We've got a nice mix of folks here, no planning or regulation. That's okay.
How is that possible with Kathy and Hannah here?
Yeah, well, it seems like they didn't pull out the poll, do the poll. Oops, called out, we caught you. Anyways, I am Meredith Elbaum. I'm the executive director here at Built Environment Plus. You may know us as the U.S. Green Building Council of Massachusetts chapter. And I'm very excited to have here today this expert panel talking about water reuse in urban environments. And I'm just going to turn the show over to my friend Bruce Douglas from Natural Systems Utilities. Bruce, take it away.
All right, great. Thank you, Meredith. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for starting your day, starting your morning early with us here. I'll be the co-host with Meredith. And one thing I'd like to start with is recognize this is going to be a deep dive in design towards net zero water in the city. So basically looking at how we can improve the urban water balance and focusing down at the building scale. The sponsors of, pop back, thank you. Really, the sponsors, in addition to my group, Natural Systems Utilities, and Meredith's group, Built Environment Plus, this really came out of the Living Future Collaborative of New England, as where the idea first germinated for this series of presentations. So the deep dive in designs is a series that we wanted to start communicating the water side of sustainability. So much emphasis is on energy, and that's important, but the water side is also critical. And so we started back in October. We did a deep dive into the R.W. Kern Center at Hampshire College, and that building was built in compliance with the International Living Futures Institute Living Building Challenge, and we went into how they addressed the water petal on that property, looking at stormwater, rainwater, drinking water, wastewater management, composting toilets at the relatively rural portion of campus, and they really did a great job with their water management, that project, and the discussion was really helpful, for the people that participated. Quick question, Meredith, is that available online?
I'm sorry, can you say that again, please?
Is the first webinar?
Ethan, it is online, and Ethan, when you get a chance, since I'm running the slides, can you drop that into the chat box? That would be great.
Right, because one of the real interesting aspects of that is that they really have made significant efforts towards rainwater capture for potable water. So it's a really interesting discussion of that. And then today we have the deep dive into the city. But in February, I really encourage you all to come back for the water energy nexus. That's where we're going to be looking at water at a building scale and how it relates to energy, how we can decrease water energy use and carbon emissions from better water management, and the relationship between water and cooling, and how we can extract thermal energy from reclaimed water. So that's should be an exciting one as well. So just a lot of key takeaways here, but the thing I really want to say is that to get to net zero water, you need to include water reuse. That's a critical takeaway. Also, water efficient fixtures and water conservation are important. They need to be part of the mix. And gray water recycling is good, but black water recycling is often better because it gets you more water available to reuse. And so it can be very cost effective because you're saving on your water and sewer bill. So this is our agenda for today. We had the first multiple choice question. And after as going forward, you'll see a color coding to the slides. The blue background will be a audience participation slide. The purple background is in recognition of Purple Pipe, it's typically used for indoor plumbing of reclaimed water. And it also to wake you up first thing in the morning if the coffee hasn't kicked in yet. But then the white slides are by our panel discussion members. So for a quick introduction of who's going to be participating, I'll be talking about the overview and some case studies, but then Zach Gallagher, my colleague at Natural Systems Utilities, will be leading the tour with Bob Gillow live in a water recycling facility. And Zach is a licensed professional engineer, LEED accredited, and he's currently Executive Vice President for Water Reuse at NSU, and his current focus is on water reuse and complete integrated infrastructure approaches that combine water and energy with a concentration on handling the system's integration aspects and overall functionality. Then we're going to, after the tour, we're going to have a panel discussion, and we're really fortunate. The tour is going to be in a building in New York City. So we have Hannah Doherty from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. She's a policy analyst there, where she works with the Integrated Water Management Group, and she supports the management of New York City's water resources and identifying cost-effective approaches to balancing regulatory and long-term sustainability goals. And she's also the project manager for their water conservation and reuse pilot program. Then we also, because this is a New England-based event, from the Boston area, primarily Massachusetts, we're really fortunate to have Kathy Watkins, who's a professional engineer, and she's the assistant commissioner and city engineer in the Department of Public Works in the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. She oversees the design and construction of city infrastructure, including the city's $175 million public investment plan, as well as permitting private development in the city. And she's been actively engaged with climate change preparedness and working to improve Cambridge's resiliency through city projects, regional collaboration, and design standards for new development projects. And one thing that's kind of interesting, if you look at the Cambridge DPW's Flood Viewer tool, I've looked online for under Flood Viewer at their website, very interesting, kind of showing the projections of the implications of climate change. Then we'll have another breakout session and then come back for Q&A and discussion.
That's me. So as many of you guys know, Built Environment Plus, we are trying to drive the sustainability of the built environment. That's our mission. And we do that in 4 major ways. One is education, which this event is a lot about education. We do some advocacy work. You may have seen a letter recently about signing on to a letter on flame retardants, to ban flame retardants. We do some research and tools, like we did a tool on the cost of net zero energy buildings in Massachusetts. And then one of the main points of our organization is to build community. And we can't do that a lot right now. And so we want to mimic what it would be like if you walked into the room and just said hi to a couple friends, or said hello to the person to your right and left. And so we're gonna just for 5 minutes go out into a breakout room with just 3 people each. Ethan is placing us into those rooms now and spreading the speakers throughout those rooms as well. And we're gonna ask a question, which is, what inspired you to come here? Say that in 1 minute or less, and then have a little conversation. And I would say that the person who woke up the earliest today will start that conversation, and then pass the mic around so that person chooses the next person. So the person who woke up earlier, and the question is, what inspired you to come here? Okay, Ethan, take it away.
Thank you, Meredith. So most in New England and Northeast, we typically think of ourselves as having plenty of water. But what we saw in 2016, 2017 in Massachusetts, these drought conditions were significant. And the top graph only goes back to 2002, which was the last relatively severe drought. But in the 60s, we had significant drought throughout New England. And we just had one this last year. Many parts of New England had severe water shortages. But I'm showing the 2016 graphic from Massachusetts, the map of Massachusetts, because that's where a lot of people were on the verge of or ran out of water and had to find alternative sources, which was very expensive. So what we know about climate change is that history is not a way to predict the future. We need to recognize we're going to get increased frequency and intensity of both droughts and rainfall events, and we need to be prepared for that. So we're talking about net zero water, and to get there, you need to understand the water balance. And typically, we think of a water balance at a watershed scale. You know, this all the water flowing on the land from the different sources, rainfall, snowmelt, and other sources. Then that leaves the watershed at a point. This is what defines a watershed: all the water that drains to a point. And your balance is your input plus your change in storage equals your output. Very, very simple. And then you could divide that down into sub-watersheds. And this is the Anacostia River, I believe, on the right, that's showing that you can divide a watershed into sub-areas. And then you could further divide that into catchments, the even small as what's going to a specific storm drain. But what we're going to be looking at is at the building scale. So, because in a city, is what you can look at the building, or in district is also valid. What we'll be talking about today is also valid at the district level. But in areas like California, and Florida, Arizona, Texas, you often have entire cities that have water reclamation programs. And that makes sense with their water scarcity and demand control and whatnot that they need to do. It's logical. Here in the Northeast, there are other options, and we can do it at a smaller scale. Can be just as effective. And this urban water innovation network is a collaboration of universities across the country. They prepared this graphic. But in the Northeast, we have Princeton and Northeastern are members of it. So they're trying to coordinate how they address urban water issues so they can not duplicate efforts and they're not competing with each other. And so this graphic is great because it shows the importance of reuse. The purple arrow, the purple raindrop is also important. I mean, efficiency is key, as well as the building patterns, how we use the landscape. How we use the roofs of the building to absorb water and recharge the groundwater. So the three major things that they can't come up with for solutions for dealing with water scarcity in urban environments are recycled water, efficiency, and building patterns. And there's not a lot of studies of water balance at the building scale. And this one from the Netherlands, you don't have to go through all the detail, but the black boxes show the areas that we can control for improving the water balance. And that is minimizing. The first black box is minimizing, so which I put in as reduce in my thought cloud. The second one is recycling, which is the black box. And the third one is multi-sourcing. So the reuse, for multi-sourcing is both a little bit of multi-sourcing means using rainwater, for example, is a multi-source. It's collecting the rainwater and utilizing that on site is a way to look at other local sources. And that's both a reuse of a resource and as well as recycling is a reuse of an available resource. The water that's used inside the building through indoor plumbing. So let's step back a little bit. Again, big picture across the country. Public water use is a really small piece of the pie of the total fresh water withdrawal in the country. And so, and of that public water use, we can look at the public water withdrawals, and the next slide will show us that a little more clearly. And so this is, I expanded the public water withdrawal side, which really represents typical municipal water uses. About almost 60% is residential. And so for each of these, depending on what project you're looking at, you'd have to have a similar breakdown. But one example, and these are just average numbers, and you really want to look at what's happening in your part of the country and your type of building. But if you start looking at typical residential water uses, which is a place where you can get a big piece of the pie of municipal water utilization, and then where are the opportunities for reuse? And one of the largest water use is toilet flushing. There's an opportunity where you don't need to have pure, clean drinking water to flush a toilet. And so we are moved towards the concept of fit for purpose water. There are other car washing and maybe in laundries don't require potable water, but typically in a household, it's considered potable water is the standard for use. But toilet flushing and cooling water is not reflected here. And when you're in an urban building, you often have a significant cooling water demand that can provide a utilization. And also, there can be green roof irrigation or landscape irrigation. And both cooling water and the green roof and the landscape irrigation can be consumptive uses and help you get towards a net zero water balance. Next, please. So, and buildings have different water footprints. I mean, per square foot, there's a significant range, between a hospital at the top, using 50 gallons per square foot per year, and a warehouse, using less than 5 gallons per square foot per year. So really, when looking at a water reuse project, you need to look at it in context of the type of building, but also it doesn't mean if you have a low intensity, you can't get a really good return on your investment. And one thing is office buildings, most of the water is in toilet flushing in an office building. So you can get a significant recycling just due to the fact that the majority of the water is non-potable, and therefore you can be recycling and really get significant water balance benefits from office settings if you have the sufficient scale. So there's a lot of people working on this across the country, and San Francisco's kind of leading the charge. They actually have a map that has purple zones around the city where water reuse is required, and they're requiring plumbing for water reuse be installed in large buildings. But this final report here is in fact, it has in the middle one of the Battery Park City buildings that we'll be talking about, and Gillette Stadium is that the upper right photograph with the blue tank there, and we'll touch base on that. But this group got together, a Blue Ribbon Commission, through a Water Environment Research Federation, and looked at how can we ensure that decentralized, distributed non-potable reuse, so that a district or a building scale can be safe and effective, can be properly designed, constructed, operated, monitored, and managed. So there's resources out there that really address the fact that we don't have to do it the way we did it in 1970 in California. And they came up with a great rule, Title 22. Many people reference it, but it was based on providing reclaimed water to millions of people in large treatment plants that had on-site labs, and it was also the concept of the time of you sample, you just keep sampling, collecting samples, as opposed to they didn't have all the automation equipment that we have today. And also the blueprint for on-site water systems helps describe how to manage a system. But go ahead, click ahead. So we have a couple projects in California. One is Hunters Point, and that's the old San Francisco Naval Yard. It'll be a district water reclamation project. It's in San Francisco's blue zone. And we also be starting up early this coming year, is a net zero water use project that in Silicon Valley by Microsoft. And their objective was to have all the non-potable demands provided from non-potable sources. So use drinking water where you need it, and if you don't need drinking quality water, using non-potable, either alternative sources such as rainwater or recycled water for irrigation and toilet flushing and cooling. So that's a really exciting project out there in the West Coast. And then here on the East Coast, one of the ones that we've been involved in since it was built is, keep clicking till you get the stadium, please, is Gillette Stadium, which was built first, and then Patriot Place a few years later. But the stadium was designed around water reclamation. It has a 250,000 gallon per day water reuse plant, and the toilet flushing is reclaimed water. And it's been since 2003. And in 2008, they expanded Patriot Place, and the restaurants and stores, their toilets are also flushed with the reclaimed water. In restaurants. But they've also just recently got a permit, and they're installing a water irrigation, a landscape irrigation system that's using reclaimed water at Patriot Place. So it's going to help them with their water balance significantly. So there's also a significant driver towards district and building scale water reuse is cost. And this graph shows in blue the top tier, so the largest quantity of water rate the users pay in these cities. And you see how much it varies, from $5 to almost $20 just for water. But then you put on top of that the sewer fee, which in most cases is more than the water fee, and that adds another, $8 to $20 depending on where you are. So really, what we're looking at is New York City is around approaching $15 per 1,000 gallons, and if we get to Boston, you're over 20, so it's 33% or so more. But then it's interesting. I put this Cambridge side by side because you cross the river, and it's $5 more per 1,000 gallons for your water and sewer fee in Cambridge. And we know about Atlanta's had water problems. Pittsburgh is a northeastern city that often just has significant cost of water, and the Seattle is up there at the top. But these can be drivers for developers to offset these costs. And I'll go into that in a minute. So a city like Boston, it's a very different watershed, and water's withdrawn from the Quabbin Reservoir and other reservoirs and piped to the users. And then many of the MWRA communities, and not all of the communities in the Boston area are on the MWRA, and some are on just for water and some just for sewer. But those that have MWRA, the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, water and sewer services, basically it's over 300 million gallons a day, conveyed and treated, and that is discharged into Boston Harbor. So it's a very linear approach. So we're going to be looking at something different today. Which is a nonlinear approach. That linear approach is on the top. The California, Florida, Arizona model is the second row down, where you still centralize it, but you're treating to reclaimed water standards at the central treatment plant and sending it back to end users. And we're going to be moving things upstream a bit in the bottom row and taking the end use from the building or buildings, recycling it and sending it right back to those building or buildings or local landscape. So Boston was very proactive, and they did a smart utilities vision a few years ago. I was involved in some of the whiteboarding sessions that they had, and they hired a consultant to evaluate options for alternative water supply and reuse. And they did a decent job here laying out general capital costs and general operation and maintenance costs. And you can see here how much cheaper rainwater harvesting is in rainwater treatment is so inexpensive. And even, you know, it costs, there's a cost of plumbing implications, there's a cost of the reclamation system, has to be taken into account. But next slide. What they didn't look at is the cost savings from those options. So if you took this slide and you wanted to put that rainwater harvesting system, it'd be a line across the bottom. And so basically there won't be a payback on water savings because you're spending your money dealing with the rainwater system is offset just very little water fees. Whereas with Blackwater reclamation, where you have the most water available to you as a resource, you can get, in this case is a 7-year payback. We've seen as little as 0, sometimes 2 to 3, sometimes up to 8 or 9. But just what you need to do is look at the fact that you're not paying those water and sewer bills, or the owners aren't, and what would the cost be of the municipal source, the green line, if you just kept paying your water and sewer bill. The blue line is your basically it shows your savings. Excuse me. Let's start again. I'm totally backwards. The blue line is no reuse. So that's if you pay your water and sewer bill with a 5% escalator every year. Sorry. And so with the green line is what you get by installing the capital cost of $1 million for water reclamation system, but what you get over 20 years is more than $3.5 million in savings. The same as I discussed before, the return on investment is about 7 years. This is just a quick Class A water in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has been fortunate to have a water reclamation rule since 2009, the only state in New England that has that. And New York City has a rule that Hannah could talk about. And these are the uses for Class A water. So, you can use it for cooling water, for irrigation, agriculture, commercial laundries, car washes. A variety of uses are available. So just to kind of give you a little background on New York City, they have a plan. They really are far-sighted in looking at their water management in the city. They also have remote reservoirs. There's a similarity here. They convey the water through aqueducts down to the city. So they're looking at how to manage that. And go back, please. There you go. So one thing that happened in the late 90s, the Battery Park Development Authority, where the map is on the right, it's right on the Hudson River in Lower Manhattan. They made the determination that they wanted to have a extremely green development, a sustainable development on this land, primarily fill along the Hudson River. And what they did is they came up with requirements of leadership and energy and environmental design standards for the development. And what the outcome of that was, a number of buildings had LEED Gold, but they met their water requirements by using water recycling. And so there's about 8 buildings now and 6 systems in the Battery Park City that have on-site water reuse, and we'll be touring one of those, the Visionaire, in a few minutes. So here's a cutaway of view of a building showing that all the sewer goes down to the basement in a classic sanitary drain, and then we treat what to meet the demand of the non-potable uses, which in this case are toilet flushing, cooling water makeup, landscape irrigation, and laundry in this example. So it's basically it's recycling that water within the building, and also there's a pocket park nearby. I'm not sure which building this is, but some of the buildings can provide landscape irrigation to a pocket park in the city. And this quick diagram, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but just show you that big tank with the bubbles in it is a membrane bioreactor. And that's what makes this work. That's what makes urban distributed water reclamation work. It's a technology that gives you an extremely high level of treatment in a very small footprint. And so the membrane bioreactor, or MBR, is incorporated into the system that we'll be touring. But also very important is the ultraviolet and ozone disinfection, is that you have a very strong system to prevent any conveyance of pathogens into the water. And then the reservoir, the lower thing is to have enough water available for your needs. So that reservoir is sized based on the diurnal fluctuations in the demand for non-potable water in a specific building or buildings. So a lot of technology goes into recording things as well as digitized daily rounds. The operator can put into their phone rather than have a clipboard of documenting what's happening, and then anyone can see it and then observe trends that are happening in addition to what the actual automated equipment is monitoring the different characteristics of the wastewater as it goes through the treatment system, and the reclaimed water can also be monitored remotely and controlled remotely with very secure systems that enable the system to run relatively automatically. With just in New York City, we have operators there 2 or 3 days a week, about maybe 10, 15 hours. Zach can elaborate on that. So quick summary here in New York City is we are achieving about 55% water reduction overall, 65% sewer discharge reduction, and using 100% of reclaimed water for cooling tower makeup. And that's going to be part of our water energy nexus discussion. We'll go into more detail on how we've done research in the city on getting the right quality of water for cooling towers and meeting all the city water requirements. They're strict and they can be met consistently, again, with the MBR and the UV and the ozone systems. So another quick example, the New School University, it's right in Greenwich Village. Next slide. There we go. It's a picture of this university center. Oh, it's okay. We can stay here. That's the university. That's the building, and this is the inside. This is the water balance. This is the interesting stuff, and a lot of fine print here. But basically, is that it's a dormitory. It's classrooms. There's some labs. The lab waste is piped separately out of through pretreatment into the sewers, but everything else goes to the reclamation system. And so we were able to calculate a specific water balance for this project, and what we're getting is on the order of 75% water reclamation here. And really what drives it is it's not supply necessarily of water to reclaim, but it's having sufficient uses. So it's really balancing. So black water gives you the most supply, and then it's looking at what are your demands for that non-potable water. And that's how you get to net zero water, is having consumptive uses such as cooling water and irrigation. So because you always have some drinking water coming in, then you need to have some, you have to minimize what's leaving the building. And you can do that by either evaporating it through a cooling tower or evaporating it through landscape irrigation. Thank you.
Okay, so we have thank you, Bruce. That was great. And you're doing great on time. I do want to just be, while everyone is filling out this poll, so which types of water reuse systems are you most experienced in? That's the question that we have here. So what do you have the most experience in? That would be great to know. We're going to leave this up for just a little bit longer, but I would like for Zach, can you let us know? I think Bob's supposed to be on, right? Has he joined us?
He has indicated that he is here. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Oh, I guess I'm not seeing him because of, okay, I see him now. Great.
I'm
So we've
glad we
got
got a
20 out
good
of 20.
cross section.
Yeah. So can you post the poll now, Ethan, please? There you go. So the majority of you have experience in rainwater. I'm curious about the other, if you want to put that in the, if you're brave enough to put that in the chat function. No one in drinking water. We learned some about the issues with that in our tour last time. But this is great. I do want to say before we get ready for the tour, Bruce, there were a couple questions in the chat while you were talking. One is, I think, related to both to the studies that you showed, the Netherlands study and the New York study. If you can send either put those, if you can put those links in the poll in the chat, people are interested in those. And then I think after this too, I think we'd like to have those links. We can put those up on the website as well to be able to
Yeah.
share some resources for people would be a good idea. We will have, just like we recorded the previous one, we are going to, this is being recorded. You are not being recorded, but the session is being recorded, the speakers, and we will put this up online. Yellow water. So with that,
that is urine diversion. You're capturing urine and treating it and reclaiming it for beneficial uses.
Fantastic. Something to learn more on. Okay, so we are going to move on to our live tour is next, and I am going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to let Zach and Bob take it away. Ethan, yeah. I think, do we want to bring Bob up? And Zach, you're up.
Great, everybody. While Ethan brings up Bob's video, so Bob Gillo and Dante are our operators in the city, two of our operators that are operating the systems that you're going to see the live tour of. I want to say that it is a pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, we are not in person in the city. I love to give these tours in person, but this is the next best thing. And now Bob will have to drink the water instead of me, so that's okay. All right, so Ethan is just going to pull up his video now. Ethan, do you need me to reach out to Bob? Do you see him?
Yep, I see Bob's phone.
Okay, perfect. There is Bob Gillo. And Bob, if you want to turn your camera around so that we are seeing in front. All right, so as Bob does that, we'll just kind of get started in terms of orienting you. So this is in the basement of the Solaire. Bruce had indicated Visionaire. We give a lot of tours of the Visionaire and the Solaire. So this is actually the Solaire basement of the wastewater treatment room. And this is as you enter the room, what you see as you enter the room. So go ahead in the room, Bob. And on the right-hand side, you're seeing the treated water storage tanks, which we are going to get to in a second as we move through the tour. But if you continue down the corridor, Bob, and then just stop right in front of the booster pumps, that would be great. As Bob gets there, the building itself is about 450,000 square feet, okay, and it has about 290 apartment units. So we have a little over 2 people per unit in the building. So we're looking at a little over 600 people in the Solaire building here, and we are capturing and recycling about 25,000 gallons per day. And we'll get into exactly what sources we're using as we look up and see the building sewer. So Bob, if you turn to your right and you kind of look up, all right, you see the main building sewer coming into the treatment room. Okay, so we are capturing all wastewater. So we just had a poll question on what types of wastewater you're most experienced with. This is a quote unquote black water system. right? We are capturing all forms of sanitary wastewater. There's a lot of debates on terminology and whether gray water or black water is preferred, especially in these types of buildings where you have a larger urban type of building with a lot of square footage. Running multiple collection system pipes to separate your gray water from your black water is not very cost effective. And we're learning more and more that gray water can have varying levels of organics in it. And the treatment that is required for gray water versus black water isn't all that much different. So the amount of additional cost that goes into a black water system is not offsetting the cost of all the additional plumbing to separate those sources of gray water and black water in these types of buildings. And so it's also better for us to collect all forms of wastewater so that we have more source to use and a higher recycling percentage. Bob, as you walk towards the treated water storage tank and you look towards the feed tank, you'll see where those pipes go into the feed tank. Okay, so stop right there. Perfect. All right, so you'll see how at the end of the video there, where there's a little yellow sign, you'll see where the sanitary sewer is both going into the feed tank and where the sewer is also leaving the feed tank. And so we have a gravity overflow here. So we get a lot of questions onto, all right, what is the integration between your centralized system and your on-site water reuse system? And it's so important to plan early. There's so many competing spaces, as many of you know, for program space and where is the ideal location for these systems. There are ways to design around this if you have to put these systems in lower elevations or higher elevations, so on and so forth. But where we can, we like to have a nice gravity overflow so that we have a feed tank where all of the wastewater enters that storage tank so that we hold that wastewater until we need it. And then if we don't need that water, if our reuse storage tanks are full, that water will just overflow out into the centralized system. And this is really mutually beneficial. Hannah will get into some of the New York City kind of history on water reuse. However, we're completely integrated into the centralized system. So we don't have to over design these systems and have, multiple trains and things of that nature and try to do something with all of that water. It just gravity overflows as we don't need it into the centralized sewer system. Okay, as it normally would coming out in any kind of lateral into that centralized system. We also waste our mixed liquor. So as we go through the treatment process, you'll learn that we are obviously treating the organics in that wastewater. We are both removing nutrients and removing solids. So as those solids build up over time, we do have to waste some of those solids, and it's mixed liquor suspended solids. You'll see it in the tank shortly, but it's 2% solids. It flows by gravity, is fine for the centralized system, and it's sent out in that pipe as well. And New York City had the foresight to think that, as long as it's not raining and it's not causing any combined sewer overflow challenge, this is actually mutually beneficial to the centralized systems. And so we don't have to send in pumping and hauling trucks to, decant those solids and pump and haul those solids away. We just tie the systems together and have the benefits of both. All right, so Bob, as you walk up to the feed tank, you'll notice that the tanks are tied into the building foundation as well. So as Bob's walking over, this wall that you're seeing right in front of you is part of the building foundation wall. So as the buildings were being built, we poured the tanks with the foundation walls and saved on overall concrete and integrated the systems so that we can save on overall space. And after we leave the feed tank, you'll see down the hallway and you'll see the size of the overall system here, which is not large in comparison to the overall building. All right, so this is the overall feed tank hatch location. So Bob, if you want to have Dante open that hatch. Okay, so this is where all of the wastewater, all the sanitary wastewater, quote unquote, black water, is coming into the feed tank. You can see that it's being air scoured and mixed to reduce any odors. And you also see the trash basket right to the right there. on the right side of the video screen. So all of the wastewater comes in, first flows through that trash basket. We collect all of the large solids, toilet paper and other things that may be coming down the drain that hasn't dissolved. And then everything else will fall into the tank and be collected there and ready for treatment as we need it. As our reuse storage tanks start to drop in elevation, we will then process more water. As I said, anything that we don't need will overflow into the sanitary sewer so that we're not wasting energy to treat water that we don't need. All right, so everything will fall through there. You'll see a 2-inch little bar screen to your right. So all of the smaller solids will flow through, and everything else will be left into that trash basket. Depending on the type of wastewater that we have and the nature of the building, that trash basket is maintained as needed. So every few weeks, we'll pull that trash basket back on the trolley, take those solids out with a double bagged garbage and throw it out with regular waste. All right, Bob. So if you want to close that, have Dante close that hatch and now point towards the feed pumps. Okay. So those are the feed pumps that are taking the source wastewater and sending it into the system for processing. These feed pumps are 2-inch non-clog grinder pumps. So any smaller solids that may have fallen through that screen basket will then be ground up in these feed pumps. This is the Solaire. As I said, it's one of the earliest systems. So what you're not seeing here on this particular system are what we call micro screens. So typically in our later systems, we also have either a muffin grinder on the feed pump itself and then a micro screen, which is taking out additional solids, which just helps on the long-term maintenance of the facility down the road. We're giving you a tour of the Solaire here because it has a lot of other upgrades as we went through, but some of the later systems will also have a micro screen. Bob is standing on top of the anoxic tank, and then we're going to start to move over to the aerobic tank. But Bob, if you want to pan over to the enclosed blowers. All right, so you saw the air scouring going on in the feed tank just to keep the odor down. Obviously, in the aerobic tank or the oxygen-rich tank, we also have air going into that tank, and we're going to talk about air scouring on the membranes as well. These are the enclosed blowers that are providing that oxygen into the wastewater to do the biological treatment and also air scouring the membranes. All right, so Bob, if you want to walk down the stairs and try not to trip as you walk down and hold the video at the same time. All right, and then just stand there for a second, Bob. So as you can see, as you walk down the corridor here, we're going to talk about all of this instrumentation on the way back as Bob comes back, but we're just going to follow the process flow for you into the aerobic tank next. But you can see it's a relatively small space. So as I said, we're treating and reusing about 25,000 gallons a day. That represents about a little greater than 50% reduction in water use. And it's about a little greater than 60% reduction in wastewater discharge out to the centralized sewer. We are using this water in this building for flush water, cooling tower water, landscape irrigation of the green roofs, sidewalk maintenance as well. In our more recent buildings, and Hannah will talk about this, the code has been updated to also allow for laundry. So in buildings like the new school that Bruce showed in the presentation, we're also using the reclaimed water for laundry as well. So then you can achieve even higher reduction in water use. And especially in those commercial type buildings or academic facilities, you're getting to 75, 80, 90% reduction in your water use, and certainly for all of your non-potable demands. All right, Bob, so if you walk towards the end of the corridor, all right, you're passing some of the backwash tanks we'll talk about. You're passing the control panels and some of the permeate pumps here. But we'll go up the ladder and into the aerobic tank and show you the mixed liquor. All right, as Bob is going up the ladder, I see a poll question has come in here. So there you go. Bruce is answering the question. So the question was, do you hold the mixed liquor when there are rain events? Is there a resident education program regarding that? So great question. Yes, we hold that mixed liquor. We only waste it as needed and as the solids build up. One of the benefits of the, Bob, if you want to go ahead and open up the hatch and show the mixed liquor. Yep. We can talk about that right now. one of the benefits of a membrane bioreactor is that we can operate at much higher levels of solids, and these are really resilient in terms of the solids levels that we can operate in. So you are seeing what we call the chocolate milk. The students love that as we give these tours. Is the chocolate milk of the processed water coming through, and you're seeing also the flex hoses going into the membranes themselves. So as I said before, this is both anoxic and aerobic treatment. We will hold that mixed liquor as it's actually processed through the membrane, and these will operate between 8,000 and 12,000 milligrams per liter in mixed liquor suspended solids. And so as we need to, as we're starting to get to 12,000 milligrams per liter and we're watching our nitrification, denitrification constituents, we will go ahead and waste those solids out to the sanitary sewer. And it's only about 1% of the flow that we need to waste. So in other words, if you have 100 gallons coming into your process, you only need to waste 1 gallon out to maintain your solids. Okay, so it's very little. It is infrequent. It's only as needed, and we do it when it's not raining. So when there's no prediction for rain in the coming 24 to 48 hour period, our operators will go ahead and waste. And there's no education requirement to the residents because it's not done by them. It's just by our operator staff that will do that manually as needed. But it is a topic of discussion in many different areas, even with Kathy recently on kind of the communication between the regulatory environments and the operations on when those wasting events are occurring. Okay, so real quick on just the nitrification here, denitrification. So obviously organic nitrogen comes into this from the wastewater sources. Things like ammonia will be coming down organically. That will be nitrified with oxygen. So nitrifying bacteria are using that oxygen, consuming that waste as it comes in, and converting that ammonia to nitrite and nitrate. We will denitrify in the anoxic tank that without oxygen with denitrifying bacteria, convert that to nitrogen gas, and then the nitrogen gas will come out of the water and off gas out the building, lower than any air permitting standard requirements that you would need. All right, so now we'll show you the membranes. Those flex hoses are actually connected into the membranes. So Dante, if you want to close those hatches, and Bob, if you want to walk over to the membrane that's above the tank. Okay, so this is what they call a hollow fiber membrane. All right, there's many versions of membranes out there, and we use a lot of them. There's no exclusivity on membranes of that nature because different membranes could be good for different types of wastewater sources and different purposes. So these are hollow fibers. What you're seeing there are all little fine spaghetti strands, and they have very small holes on the outsides of those spaghetti strands. All right, and so the permeate pumps will suck water through those fine strands and remove the solids out. So you're not going to be able to see it even when you're there in person. You can't see these holes. These are ultrafiltration membranes. These are 0.04 microns in size. So very small holes that the water is then sucked through so that you get your clear permeate out and you leave your solids behind. All right, those membranes are cleaned in a number of different ways. As I said, the blowers will provide air scouring to the membrane to keep solids off, but it'll also, we have a backwash tank that you'll see as Bob walks back through the corridor that will send water, permeate water back through the membrane in the opposite direction to then force any solids off and keep the membranes clean, keep as much surface area there for processing as we can. All right, Bob, if you want to rotate towards the hoist and show them the hoist and the dip tank. Okay, so up above you is the hoist, all right? And so we'll use that to take membranes out of service if we need to. So you can see with these types of membranes, you do need a little more headroom to get these types of membranes out. There are other membranes, if you have lower headspace requirements or availability, we can use other versions of membranes that don't require this hoist to get them out as well. But that train will drop down, we'll put the membrane out of service if we need to, and then we'll put it into the dip tank, and that dip tank is right below these steel great hatches that you see, and put it into a cleaning solution and clean it as needed. Really, it's not very frequent, depends on how hard you're pushing the membranes, but every couple of months you can take one of those out of service, put it into the dip tank, let it sit, and get cleaned, and then put it back into service. So you can see there's one spare membrane right now sitting inside the dip tank. that we have in a cleaning process. Okay. If you want to put the steel hatch back on, Bob, and then walk down to the control panel, see if there's any other questions that came in. Resident education, great, thanks, understood. What type of training or license is required to manage the system? Is it a third party of folks on staff? Speak to the operational staff and cost relation. Perfect. Okay. Diane, great question. In terms of the maintenance that's required on these systems, our operators are there about 2 days a week, roughly, 4 hours a day or so. So in 8 hours a week, we operate and maintain this system. There are different licensing requirements depending on the state that you are operating in. So if you're out in California, there's different classes of operators. There's class 1 through 5. Similar in New Jersey, you have class 2, class 3 wastewater operators that are operating these systems. So it depends on the state and the location that you're in, and the frequency for operations staff to be there really is more dependent on the regulatory environment and the sampling requirements more than the maintenance themselves. So in New York City, again, they had a lot of foresight in terms of how these systems could be monitored and controlled. We're only there 2 days a week. And in other states, particularly in San Francisco right now, if you have a Blackwater system, there are daily fecal coliform sampling requirements in San Francisco, which would require an operator to go there every single day. It increases the maintenance costs. Certainly not needed. We'll talk about the disinfection system and some other things going on. And San Francisco is evolving in terms of they were really hands tied by Title 22. And now they're evolving into moving through that and requiring less operations frequency for manual labor. So a lot of the codes are starting to be updated in this learning process. Okay, so this is the processed water that comes out of the membranes. And then Bob, if you want to show the backwash tank. Okay, so once the water comes out of the membranes, it'll first go into this backwash tank, and then it'll go through our disinfection system so that we always have backwash water available to then send back to the membrane and get any additional solids off. All right, and Bob, if you want to turn behind you, we'll show you the control panel. Okay, so this is the PLC, or Programming Logic Controller. One of the things that allows us to only go to these systems 2 days a week is the technology that's built in. So this Programming Logic Controller will control the system without our operators needing to be there. It has all flow rates being monitored, all alarm conditions being monitored so that our operators know exactly what's going on in the system at any given time. They can remote in with their iPhones, their iPads, what need you to control the system in addition to see what alarms are going on. We have some cross training going on between the building management staff and our operators as well. So if our operators don't need to be there, they don't have to be there, and the building management staff can handle it. But certainly for different types of alarms and different events, our operators will go in and service the system as needed. All right, Bob, if you go down the hallway a little further to the odor control system and the disinfection system, we'll first show you the odor control, and then we'll show you the disinfection system. All right, so this is the odor control tank. One of the biggest disadvantages of seeing this virtually versus in person is, one of the biggest surprises that people see is there's very little to no odor in these systems whatsoever. So you walk in the room and you don't know that you're in a wastewater treatment plant. And so part of that is because the membrane bioreactor and the nature of the system, we are treating water pretty quickly. So we're not allowing for any stagnation or any odor buildup to begin with. But on top of that, we have this odor control system. Bob showing you the pipe. And so all of the headspace. So when Bob opened up that tank and showed you the mixed liquor, you saw there was some airspace above that hatch. All of that headspace is being vented through this odor control system. This is activated carbon. And so we're treating that air as it comes out of that system. And then it is being off-gassed out into atmosphere at different levels depending on where you are and what regulations you may have to adhere by. In this building, it's going out to the ceiling. In other buildings, it goes out to sidewalk spaces with other vents. There's really very little odor to it, but it depends on what your requirements are. So that is the activated carbon system. Bob, if you turn to your left, you'll see the disinfection system. Okay, so this is what you're seeing is the ozone system. There you go, ozone system right there. You can see the yellow sign on it. All right, so you're seeing the ozone generator, you're seeing the ozone control panel, and then Bob, if you want to show them the UV container as well. All right, so that's a vertical UV unit right there that you're seeing right in the screen. All right, we use both ozone and UV to do disinfection and have redundancy. We actually find lower energy requirements when you use ozone and UV together because you're doing a lot of treatment with UV at lower energy per gallon. And then your ozone is really doing more than just disinfection. Ozone is also treating for color and odor as well. So when you have a high end use like this, where you're putting it into flushing units for residential buildings and things of that nature, you really want to make sure that you have a clean, clear, consistent product going into that use. And so ozone does a really nice job of that. A lot of discussions on endocrine disruptors and pharmaceuticals and all of that kind of stuff as well. So the ozone redundancy with UV for this application is very appropriate. If you're just using the water for irrigation or other uses, maybe you just need the UV, but your design engineers will help you through that. If you want to show the turbidity meter. Okay, perfect. So you can see the turbidity is currently reading 0.2. That's in NTU, so that's nephelometric turbidity units. Okay, and if you know the codes and you know the regulations, you know a lot of the regulations are saying 5 NTU is when you need to maintain the system or do some work on it or see what's going wrong. We rarely see NTU readings ever above 1. Typically, it is 0.3 or less, and really it's more of an indication that potentially the sensor inside the turbidity unit will need to be cleaned because it's getting some discoloration on it, and that's more the case than anything else in terms of the level of quality of the water. So if that turbidity reading were ever to hit 2 NTU, we actually have it set lower than 5. If it ever hits 2 NTU, the system goes into automatic bypass. We put potable water from the city into our storage tanks and run it off of that. In 20 years of operating this system, it's never happened. All right, but we have that fail-safe in place to make sure that we're balancing public health and operations and efficiencies. And we have that there just in case we were ever to have a failure within the system. It would bypass the system itself automatically. Our operators would take care of it and go on their merry way. But again, has not happened. Bob, if you want to pan to the left real quick and show them the ATP unit. This is a little bit of an advanced notice. We're not done with the study, but we're working with a company called Luminultra out of Canada. Online biological monitoring is really the next kind of foray into having additional information to the public health and safety officials within those areas to ensure that that's being maintained. And so one of our hopes is that with the advancements in online biological monitoring, this is measuring ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So it's measuring any living organisms coming through, protozoa, bacteria, things of that nature. So we're going through that study now to not only have the surrogates in place, not only have your turbidity in place, your power monitoring, your disinfection levels, your transmittance through your UV, all of those surrogates that are saying that the system's doing what it needs to be doing. On top of that, adding in biological monitoring as well, so that where we have codes and regulations in place that say we have to do daily fecal coliform sampling, and we want to try to reduce the maintenance on these systems to make them more affordable for more uses at more flow ranges, we're adding technology such as this. So we're going through the study right now on that online biological monitoring, and we will have a paper out shortly on that. All right, Bob, so if you want to show them the finished product. All right, so Dante is just opening the valve off of the disinfection loop. So you're seeing the water as it's coming out of the disinfection system before it goes into the storage tanks. And so, Bob, if you want to have Dante put a little glass under that and just fill the glass up. All right, so you saw what the chocolate milk looked like, and now you're seeing the end product. Okay, so obviously, it looks very drinkable, and I do drink it every time that I'm there. I'm not going to ask Don. There you go. So Dante's going to drink it for us. All right. Thanks, Dante. I appreciate it. I've been drinking it for over 20 years now. I'm still alive. All right. I've lost a lot of hair, but my brother is older than me and he's lost more hair than I, and he doesn't drink the water. So I don't think it's related to the water. All right. But no, in all kidding aside, there's a lot of, as I said before, endocrine disruptors, pharmaceutical studies going on. As I said, the activated sludge process is doing a lot of treatment on that itself. However, then you had the ozone on top of it and the overall use and nature of the building. We're not concerned. Meets primary drinking water standards. We're not allowed to use it for drinking in the states at this time. However, there's many areas that are using very similar technologies that are drinking this water out of necessity. So it is safe as long as you do it in the right way. Bob, if you want to pan to your left and show them the treated water storage tanks. Okay. So these are the two tanks that are storing that finished water. It is being continuously recirculated through the disinfection system to keep it fresh as we need it. And it does have sensors in place, both floats and ultrasonics, so that we can control our process water and feed into the system. All right. So as that water is draining out of the tanks and being used for those end uses that we talked about, it will then force the feed pumps to kick in and bring more source water into the process and then fill those tanks back up. Okay, so Bob, if you want to just go back over to the booster pumps, I'm going to really quick read any additional questions. Looks like Bruce has answered most of them. The energy costs, great question. And we're going to talk about thermal energy recovery in our next session with built environment. So stay tuned for that. I'll give you a little highlight. We do recover the thermal energy in this system out of the back end of the system and then use that to preheat our domestic hot water, which makes this system net energy neutral and other systems even net energy positive. So more to come on that. We'll talk about that in the next section. And then is there a sense of scale necessary to balance the system's life cycle assessment? So great question. We typically say that it all depends on your local environment, right? Bruce talked about the cost of water up in the Massachusetts area, compared it to the cost of water in New York City. New York City also has some incentives in place that Hannah is going to get into. So it all depends on the cost of water. We generally recommend that if your centralized or alternative water supply and wastewater treatment is above $12 per 1,000 gallons, it makes sense to look into a complete on-site water reuse system where you can achieve flows of 10,000 gallons a day or higher. If you're less than 10,000 gallons a day, it may make more sense. You have a smaller building. It may make more sense to look at gray water or rainwater, stormwater reuse and not a complete water reuse system, depending on the cost. So generally speaking, if you can get the flows of greater than 10,000 gallons a day, if you have a cost of $12 per 1,000 gallons or higher, generally will make sense to look at a water reuse system of this nature. If it's smaller than that or your costs are lower than that, you may want to look at considering rainwater, stormwater, gray water reuse as well. But as I said before, gray water reuse is getting to the point where there's so much variability in the influent sources of gray water that you almost need similar levels of technology. All right, so just to end the tour real quick, I will show you the booster pumps here. And those booster pumps are then sending that water up to those uses. So again, it's flush water, it's cooling tower water, it's irrigation of the rooftop gardens, sidewalk maintenance here, and then also laundry in other buildings in New York City. All right, and so this is a constant pressure system. Every time a few people will flush their toilets, you will see a drop in the pressure in the system, and the booster pumps will kick on to repressurize the system. Again, from a planning perspective, if we were able to put some storage up on the rooftop, just like a domestic house tank, you can lower some of the energy consumption and not have to have your booster pumps kicking on as often. So storage location becomes important in your planning process as well. And with that, I will kick it back over to Meredith and Bruce. And I want to thank Bob and Dante very much for bringing us through the system. And I'll continue to answer questions on the chat as they come in.
Thank you, Zach. That was absolutely fantastic. A big round of applause and thumbs up from everyone for that, and for Dante and Bob in New York. I think this is, there are a lot of negatives about COVID-19 right now and being virtual, but this is one of the positives, that we could all go on a tour of a building in New York City right now. That's amazing, and have guests also from all over the place. So thank you very much. Bob, if you can turn off your camera, that would be helpful, so that we're not seeing you go around. Next up, we are going to have, and Ethan, thank you, Ethan, too. We're going to do another breakout for 5 minutes. Ethan's all ready to put us into rooms again. And the question this time is, what's holding you back from net zero water? What is holding you back from net zero water? To have a conversation, and when you come up with those answers, start putting them in the chat, because I think that will be something that our panelists can answer some of those questions and focus on those. And so we're going to break out into groups. I think we're going to, the person who has the most pets currently will be the person to begin the conversation and then pass, and if no one has any pets, then maybe it's the person who has had the most pets over their lifetime. And if no one has pet, if there's still a tie, rock, paper, scissors for who gets to go first. So we're going to break out into those breakout rooms, and we will see you back here in 5 minutes. Launch into a discussion that Bruce is going to lead between our expert panelists. And Bruce, why don't you do you want me to bring up those slides now, or do you want to wait?
I guess the make sure everyone's unmuted amongst Hannah, Kathy, Zach, and I, and everyone else is muted.
Okay. And Ethan, if you can profile them, that would be great.
Okay. Thank you. So there we go. And so what I'd like to do is if we could start with Hannah's slide. And if I could ask Hannah, just how has the New York City's on-site reuse program evolved over time, since you have the longer history with it?
Sure. Can you all hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so it really helps having Zach present. Initially, he gave you some context to the Battery Park City Authority's efforts for a completely sustainable building environment that really propelled and raised the bar for all aspects of sustainability, including water conservation. And so in the early 2000s, Battery Park City constructed a number of buildings with on-site water reuse systems. And that put the city in the position of having to now think about these systems and how do you regulate these systems. And so he mentioned the water quality standards. And this was taken on by our Department of Health. Now, one thing that will be a theme throughout the timeline of New York City's, the evolution of on-site reuse in the city is one of multi-agency cooperation and involvement, because it does intersect with many different responsibilities of these different agencies. And so also in the early 2000s, the Department of Environmental Protection, which is New York City's water and wastewater utility. I work for the DEP. We also began offering a comprehensive water reuse program discount rate at that same time as part of part of that cooperative support for these on-site water reuse systems. Now, every box on this slide that has red is the release of one of our incentive programs for on-site water reuse. And so moving along into the earlier 2000s, then as I mentioned, initially Department of Health was responsible for the development of regulating water quality. That then transitioned to the Department of Buildings. And those water quality standards were incorporated into our plumbing code, starting in 2008. And then that evolved in 2014 with a new plumbing code. The Department of Buildings revised slightly their code, but it continued to remain with Department of Buildings. And then moving into the later 2000 teens, the DEP began taking a renewed interest in on-site water recycling. At this time, we were faced with a number of major infrastructure repairs that required a whole thinking of our system's resiliency. Also, we have climate change that we know is coming, and that leads to increasing variability in weather. And so particularly in the Northeast, we are actually expecting increasing rain events. And I've talked with in some of these breakouts with others about concerns around water quality and nutrient overloading. And we see water conservation as actually not just thinking about water supply, but also something that can help us think strategically in addressing water quality concerns. Because if we can keep wastewater and nutrients and things out of the sewer system when we have really heavy rain events, that can free up capacity for just stormwater to flow rather than increasing just more risk of water contamination flowing into our rivers. That might not be very clear. I can touch on that later. But for the sake of, I'll just keep moving along here. So there was this sense of this integrated approach for water quality, water supply, and wanting to support on-site water reuse. And so we began offering incentives for on-site water reuse. We launched our on-site water reuse grant pilot program, and also at the same time, re-engaging with where our regulations for on-site water quality standards were housed, if you will. It had been, as I said, with Department of Buildings, but there's an interest in re-engaging with the Department of Health on this. And so starting around 2016, we began having conversations with the Department of Health around what should water quality standards be? How can we also engage at the national level? That's been really growing over the past couple decades. Zach mentioned San Francisco, but we also have Austin, Seattle. There's many other cities that are really taking on-site water reuse, and we wanted to be able to learn and share and collaborate across the country. So we also relaunched that conservation grant in 2019, expanded it a little bit from some lessons learned from the initial launch. And then this year, I mentioned the plumbing code has been revised. And now through that, from those initial conversations with the Department of Health, now we're at a place where in this plumbing code that's going to ultimately come into effect in a couple years from now, it will defer to our Department of Health and Mental Health for the water quality guidance. The Department of Buildings will still regulate the physical structure, but the water quality component is going to relate with Department of Health. So this gives you a broad sense of what is decades of experience with water reuse in New York City, but from a regulatory perspective, it's also been an evolution and lots of learning that has happened over the past. So that's a snapshot, and happy to, I'm looking forward to hearing from Cambridge's experiences. They're also just get into it, and looking forward to the discussion after.
Super. Thank you, Hannah. That was very useful, a good perspective. And I think we overlook the importance of management. It's technology alone is not going to address these issues. We really need to have sound management programs and regulatory programs, monitoring to confirm compliance. And that's a good segue into Massachusetts, and as we get Kathy's slide up, I'm just going to point out that one thing that's really changed in Massachusetts, or in the Regional Water Authority, MWRA's regulatory program, is that they have enabled called a New York City style reuse system, what you just saw, to be installed in their towns that use their sewer services. And it was fixing an archaic regulation that prevented any byproduct from any treatment system, except for drinking water, to go into the sewers. And now they do allow it, and it does require a pre-treatment permit from them in the city. And I'll let Kathy kind of take it from there, where Cambridge is just embarking on this potential solution in their city. Go ahead, Kathy.
Thanks. So I would just start out with saying that I am definitely the least knowledgeable person on this panel about these systems. I think it's a good perspective in the sense that we are a community that's very interested, but we are definitely in the early, we have questions phase. And so, listening to the discussion and being part of the discussion is really helpful, but, definitely we're in the very early phases. And, we've had a number of different development projects that have implemented rainwater harvesting, but we are really just getting to the point of having the first developer that's interested in implementing a black water system. And so it's one we've been talking to developers about for a number of years about, oh, would you be interested in? And we finally have sort of a first large developer that's interested. And so it's really becoming critical in terms of timing for us. And I think there's some real excitement there. And if I think about sort of what's driving people to do it and then what the concerns are, I would say, one of the big drivers is sustainability. I think, from the community, from planning board, from city council, from staff, there's a strong commitment to sustainability in the city. And so a lot of that has traditionally been focused on energy use, and then also, protection from stormwater and flooding events. And so we're really excited to see the sort of definition and understanding of sustainability broaden. And so hope this type of system can become part of that language. One of the things people talked about is sort of the payback periods and the costs. One of the things that's really driving interest in this type of system in Cambridge is the cost of inflow and infiltration requirements. So Mass DEP has a regulation that if people are adding flow into municipal sewer systems, if they're adding more than 15,000 gallons a day, they have to offset that 4 to 1. So for every gallon of sewer they put in, they have to take out 4 gallons of stormwater. And so as a specific example, in the city of Cambridge, if you have a large development that's adding 250,000 gallons of sewer flow into the system, that means you need to take out 1 million gallons of stormwater from the system. Our system is quite old and complex, and those projects aren't cheap. And so what we found is that they easily cost $15 a gallon to remove. And so what that means is that you could have an upfront cost of infrastructure that the developer has to implement that could be $15 million. And so when you look at sort of payback, that's an upfront cost that if they can divert that flow from the system, then they don't have to do that II on that amount of flow. And so we've had some initial conversations with DEP, and they are supportive of taking any sewage that's diverted to the black water system out of that calculation. And so that can be a significant upfront cost savings to the developer that can really help with some of this discussion about payback periods. If I think about the sort of concerns and questions, so Bruce talked a little bit about the permitting. So DEP does have, a clear regulation that was established in 2009 for reclaimed water permits. So that makes it helpful in terms of understanding what the groundwork is that needs to be done. MWRA also recently updated their regulations. So again, previously, flow from this type of system was not allowed into the MWRA system. And Cambridge, like, many communities in the Boston area, sends all of our sewer to the MWRA. So it has to meet both Cambridge regulations and MWRA regulations. So with that change, it is now an allowable use in the MWRA sewer system, which is great. So now we have clear regulations from, DEP, MWRA. We're still trying to figure out what does it mean for us, building codes. And then one of the other things in terms of sustainability and sort of questions we have is just sort of the details of the system and how it's designed. and make sure that the system is protected from projected flooding events. So we want to make sure as we have these sort of smaller localized systems that they really are going to be sustainable as we look at projected increases in flooding. And then finally, just sort of the last long-term sort of the question we have, and we keep asking, and these examples of systems that have been in place 20 years are extremely helpful, because sort of the long-term operation and maintenance of the system, I would say, is sort of our biggest question and concern. So we don't want to be in a position where we've permitted a large building and assume that they're going to manage a substantial amount of the sewer flow at the building through a black water system, and at some point in the future they need to send that flow to the city system, because we then haven't designed the system to accommodate that flow. And so I think that's probably the sort of the biggest question, is how do we sort of go through that and have a level of confidence that 15, 20, 30, 40 years down the road, the system is still working. And again, I think as you have larger developers, institutions, it becomes easier to have confidence in that sort of long-term system. So I think those are sort of the questions that we have. And again, I would just say that we're really interested and excited about working with a developer to implement this type of system in terms of long-term benefits.
Super. Well, thank you, Kathy. Those are good questions. And I guess we just got a couple more minutes before we want to open it up to questions from everyone. But I guess one thing, I think it's a good segue that your last concern, and in New England, experience goes back to the mid-90s. In Connecticut shoreline, we have some systems, reuse systems that have been in operation since 1995 and 97 in Rentham. But Zach, can you talk about some of the even older systems in New Jersey?
Sure. Yeah, I think, Kathy, just to kind of get after that, the New York City system started, design started in 99. The first system, in-building system, started in 2003. That was the Solaire that you just saw. So, over 17 years now of uninterrupted operations and 100% compliance with that system and all the other Battery Park City systems and Manhattan systems, and now over in Queens as well, that have come since then. But the Blackwater reuse systems that we were involved with first started in 1987 in the state of New Jersey. And it wasn't because there was a huge sustainability or environmental push to do it. It was really because the centralized systems, there was sewer ban restrictions, and they couldn't get to some of these communities. And so they had soil conditions that wouldn't allow for discharge of that water back into the groundwater. And so we needed to reduce as much water use as possible and make sure that our discharge out into the environment was to the point where it was getting back into the groundwater safely and all that kind of stuff. So there was a Blackwater reuse system that was Bristol-Myers Squibb, pharmaceutical company, back in 1987. So there's a long history on a lot of these systems, but I think your point, Kathy, is well taken. We're hearing this a lot from a lot of different municipalities and cities as to great, we understand it. We understand how it can be mutually beneficial. We're a little bit concerned about, how some of these systems in the 70s and 80s that were built have failed, and then the municipalities and the cities had to take them over. And so there's a lot of that skepticism and concern out there. And so the best way to get after that is to show them all of these examples and to ensure that you're looking at these systems from a design, build, and operations perspective, and then long-term operations as part of that upfront plan, and that you engage with the right partners to do that. And when that's done, we have a long history here of showing success for that. And so I think it's engaging in those conversations early, making sure those partners are lined up. And the risk-based framework that Bruce mentioned, that was published in partnership with WRF and SFPUC and others, gets into the financial viability of those RMEs, or responsible management entities, and the long-term maintenance program. So there's a whole chapter in that book that's set up around this concern to help those agencies and stakeholders plan for this.
I mean, the other thing I would add is I think, having clear regulations and oversight and involvement from DEP. And so, at the city, that's Mass DEP, gives us also a level of comfort. So we've implemented other systems that we've had O&M issues with, but, having a state regulatory. And so I guess going back to Hannah, do you have state regulations as well? So it's not just the city that's overseeing and regulating these?
That's a great question. We don't have state regulation,
Okay.
actually. And so that's been something that has left us at times when as the city's water wastewater utility wanting to be able to look to a standard for moving forward and not having that. I mean, we've been able to move forward, and I think in part having precedence of these other cities around the country has been very key in terms of keeping the other, like the Department of Buildings, the Department of Health engaged when we don't really have state initiative.
Which also makes it harder for other city. I mean, other cities in the state can look to your regulations, but then they would have to replicate them.
Yeah, and
terms
I
of
should say
having that.
In Long Island, there is on-site water recycling in a different way. They're not, it's not so much focused on in building. It's a different kind of application, but the state is regulating for, say more like reusing recycled water for golf courses, things like that. But in New York City, that doesn't really have much application. So there is some, I should say, there is some state regulation, but not to the application we're talking about today.
Yeah, and Kathy and Hannah and DEP are certainly involved with this. We can't, speak too much about it because it's just in the early stages, but we're starting to get the state DEC, in this case, in New York, more involved with these reuse systems. And the way that we're starting to do it is, as you look at some of the combined sewer overflow and some of the wet weather impacts that a lot of cities are challenged with, in many cases, discharges to the river, and I shouldn't say discharge, but recharge or stream flow improvement into the river is regulated by the state versus the city. So in cases where you're looking at combined sewer overflow benefits and treating water to keep untreated water out of the rivers, in many cases, the state agencies would need to be involved. And that's where we're starting to see a lot of collaboration between the city regulation and the state regulation.
Yeah, it's an important issue. Any Hannah or Kathy, anything you want to add, or we can go to questions? We have 10 minutes left. If you want to open up to questions from the group.
All right, so let's open up to questions, and then
Questions are good.
we can close.
Okay.
So I was going to say, while those questions are coming in, I have a question for the audience or for the attendees, as well as those on the panel. For me, it feels like you guys have made an excellent case for really looking at reusing water in buildings, and that it makes sense to do that. And I think if you look at some of the obstacles that people found in the discussions, we saw a trend, right? Which one was cost, right? And I think you guys have answered that, but I think it's even more than the cost, it's the perception of cost, right? And then there's also this perception that these are meant for buildings that are going to be ultra sustainable, that it's not possible to just do in a mainstream building, right? You're only going to do it if you're doing a living building. There's perception. And I think my question for people is, after you've seen this, what kind of how do we get this message out to more people? How do we make this more public knowledge and have more developers who are really looking at doing this? What sort of resources do you as professionals need? And is there a role for our organization to come together to help and pull experts together to pool these resources? So why don't you put that in the chat box? I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Are there additional questions, or have we done the speakers do such a good job at answering all the questions?
Meredith, there was one question about generators that I didn't get to speak to, so maybe I'll start there while we wait for some other questions to come in.
Perfect.
So it depends on the building, and it was really an option for the owners on these in-building systems, whether to tie the systems to generators or not, or size their building generators to handle the system. In most cases, because we do have the backup of the centralized sewer system and the integration, some of those buildings in New York City chose not to tie the entire system to the generator requirements. However, the blowers, just to keep the biology alive, the biology was being, was seen as, we don't want to reseed these. We don't want to have downtime within the systems after a power outage and things of that nature. So the blowers were tied into the generators so that we could keep the air going into the mixed liquor and keep the biology alive so that we wouldn't have to reseed it. In some cases, they tied the entire system in there because they were doing it for a resiliency benefit, where they wanted to ensure a supply of water in the event that the city water system was down or the power outage was there. So depending on what the project's goals were and what their risk factors were and their overall cost applications, there was a range. All of our decentralized community-based systems that are not integrated with centralized systems all have backup generators. And this was a key for decentralization and community-based systems when things like Superstorm Sandy happened. I'm sure you guys all remember that, but as Bruce, introed, we have 100 systems on the East Coast that were in the direct impact of Superstorm Sandy. Not a single one of those systems went down or violated permit conditions, while we had centralized systems that were down for weeks and months at a time, discharging raw wastewater into our environment. And the reason was because we had backup generators. That was the biggest challenge, was keeping the generators fueled, and all of our operators were part of that community and engaged with those fuel providers, kept the generators full, kept things running, kept safe, affordable, clean water being treated to the environment. So it's really a good resiliency story on how to integrate our centralized decentralization as resiliency becomes a bigger picture of our future.
And I would just add, so whenever Zach says about the backup to the sewer system, that's where I get like,
Exactly. Yep.
So and I hear it's like, it's not often, but I just want to be honest, like that's where I get like, ooh, that's where my level of risk is. And so
Yep.
I think we can manage it and we'll get there, but it is that backup to the sewer system that is where the risk to the city and the MWRA come into play. And so it's working through the details of that. So,
and Kathy, part of that would be, okay, in Cambridge, we want to make sure that this entire system is tied to the backup generator so the system keeps
Correct.
running, right?
Yes.
But part of the reality is if you're in a major, disaster or power outage and things of that nature, you won't be seeing those flows anyhow, right? Those uses wouldn't be occurring into our decentralized system or the centralized system. So it's part of that knowledge barrier and education kind of build up as to, okay, what uses will still be happening in that type of event and what do we need to get there? And so if it's that clean water getting up there, then that's part of the solution. If it's less use otherwise because people aren't in the building and it's not occupied, that's a different, kind of solution, right?
Yep.
Great,
This is
thanks.
good.
So we
Go
have
ahead.
some questions in the chat. I was gonna ask if Jim Newman could actually ask his question of Kathy and Hannah out loud. There you are.
Fair enough. Hi, guys. Kathy, thank you for joining this conversation. Fantastic. So my question was, if you could pick one reason that the two cities are interested in Blackwater reuse at the building level, like what's that primary reason? What's the thing that's like the key driver for you?
Yeah, from the New York City perspective, it's actually more water quality. Water supplies in the background, but for us, our major driver is addressing combined sewer overflows and water quality challenges.
And I would say from Cambridge, something very similar. It's about keeping sewage flow out of the system. And so we fully support all the sustainability improvements, and that's a big positive for us. But, my personal driver is about keeping flow out of the system, both from Cambridge's system as well as MWRA's regional collection system.
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Great answer.
I'm gonna ask Samantha, you had a question for Hannah about incentive programs. If you can come on and ask that question. Thank you.
Yeah, so Hannah, you mentioned that you try to introduce some incentive programs. I'm assuming they're financial incentive programs for people to reduce their consumption in general. So I'm just wondering if you can really tell how effective those programs are just on a whole.
Yeah. Also, I apologize. There's a lot of trucks. I hope you don't hear background noise right now. I don't know, maybe you are, but I apologize for that. So yeah, the incentive programs are particularly the comprehensive water reuse program, which is the rate discount, which is an ongoing financial incentive. After the system has been built, our grant that we just recently started offering is really just for the upfront costs. And there's lots of interest. We have one application that has come in. I mean, it definitely targets more of right now anyway, the much more larger complex projects. So the comprehensive water reuse program has been definitely, though, the driver knowing that that's in their future, that will in the long term help reduce their ongoing operation costs. I think that's in terms of the incentives we offer. I know that's the one that is really the one customers go after. Though I think the upfront capital costs, like our grant, that is also a plus. But the rate discount is key.
Yeah. So do you feel like introducing those incentive programs have encouraged people that wouldn't maybe not do those projects in the beginning to actually go after them?
I don't know, but it has definitely spurred the conversation. There's another conversation or a question in the chat about getting people thinking about this. And, you know, so I'm going to sort of segue from your question into this question and combine them. But this has given us a platform to promote and talk and engage. At the same time, having the support from developers, local environmental groups, there's a real compatibility there. And I think it really takes people coming to us and asking and wanting to see more of these systems that then we are able to, where we can then promote our financial incentive programs. But it really goes two ways. Like, we also in part have these financial incentive programs because we know there's support from environmental groups, and we continue to have interest, people coming to us asking about it, and just having that standing program has really helped, I think, spur the conversation. And also, again, part of like engaging with the city agencies, it's been impactful at different levels.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for the question, Samantha. I know that Kathy has a hard stop and others may too. I'm going to leave the meeting open to continue dialogue if people want to, but I want to give a shout out to Kathy and to Hannah and to Zach, and especially to Bruce for organizing this, as well as Bob, and I am blanking on the young man who also was there.
Deontay.
But
Yep.
Yes, Dante, right? Fantastic. So thank you so much for organizing this. Bruce, did you want to say a closing word?
Well, I just want to thank everyone. This has been really useful, and especially the participants for coming out early, and I hope it's been useful to you as well. So I really appreciate all the organizers, and Jim and Newman and Diane Tufts among those, and everyone presenting it. So one question, Meredith, we'll put this up online afterwards, and when will that be available?
Hopefully within this week, we'll put it up online. And this is actually making me starting to think that we need kind of a water resources part on our site, and that to have a place for people to come and hear about that. So we'll get the word out on that. I want to make a plug for everyone to go up and sign up for the February event on the Water Energy Nexus. Speaking of energy, I want to make also a plug for next week on December 15th. We're having a net zero carbon zoning discussion focused on the city of Boston and the work that they're doing there. We have a fantastic panel. There's going to be opportunity like this for discussion between people. So please go sign up for that. We're calling it BE Plus Morning Brew, thinking about a series of early morning coffee sessions. And then I also want to make a plug for January. We are going to be having the call for nominations for our board of directors is going out on the 17th, and those will be announced on our January 28th annual meeting. So to put things out there, but more to come on this water series. And really, I think that water in general, we don't talk about it enough, right? It gets overshadowed by energy and by health and materials, but it's a super crucial issue, and I hope that we can continue to be a home to talk about it more. So I'm going to leave this open because if we were in real life, people would kind of trickle out and possibly have side conversations. So I'm going to leave it open. If you want to leave, you can. Otherwise, if you have a question, I'm sure some folks might be able to stick around for a little bit. So, and Ethan, maybe if you can unpin the four of us and have it be more of an open group. Thanks all.
And Meredith, I would just say as well, I see a number of questions in the chat here of people that had to leave at a hard stop at 10. You know, I'm happy to answer these questions by email. If you want to circulate addresses or if you want to give my email out, that's fine as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Anything? Okay, thank you, Hannah.
Okay.
Thanks,
Hannah, for
Meredith and Ethan.
coming.
Yeah.
And
Anyone else have a question?
Samantha, I'll just add to Hannah's response there real quick. I can tell you for sure, I work directly with the developers that if the comprehensive water reuse program was not in place, some of those buildings would not have reuse systems. Many of the Battery Park City buildings were regulatory, sustainability driven. Battery Park City Authority kind of put that in place. And so the developers felt almost obligated to do that as they went through their lead requirements, which really got the precedence there. And then as we're getting to more and more areas within New York City, return on investment is becoming part of the triple bottom line. And so, yes, these are sustainability, environmentally driven developers. However, if there's not a return on that investment, they are not moving forward with it. So that comprehensive return water reuse program, which provides a 25% rate incentive, is really driving a lot of these economic decisions. And so the larger buildings are still moving forward, but when you get to those smaller scale buildings, which are 10, 15, 20, 25,000 gallons a day, it makes the economic case hard unless you have some of those economic incentives. In New York City, you saw they were a little lower on the cost versus Cambridge and Boston and Seattle and San Francisco, right? So it really depends on that cost threshold and the scale of the system and what that ROI threshold is. A lot of these developers have a 5 to 10 year kind of ROI. And if you go beyond that, it really is not appetizing to them.
Yeah, that's really interesting because right now I work in the solar industry. And so people are constantly thinking about return on investment. And I just never thought about that for the water industry before, but it makes total sense because you got to pay for that stuff too. So that was a really interesting point. Thank you for that.
Yep. Good. All right.
Wondering about,
Go ahead,
Bruce, just to let you know that your responses actually just came only to me, not to everyone.
I know. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'll follow up.
I guess the follow-up question for me or thought is the building scale versus the district scale, and that in some instances wouldn't actually make more sense to have a purple pipe coming from at the district level, but of course that's hard to do in New York City. But is that something like, is that in the future where like, is that where we'd like to see things go, that it's not done individually, but that it's done more at a district scale?
Yeah, so it's a balance. In New York City, we've looked at the economics pretty closely. We did a study with the New York State Energy Research Development Authority, and we found that the block scale is the most optimum from a triple bottom line standpoint. So it's not as big as a centralized scale because you have all that horizontal infrastructure that you've got to maintain and costs around that and all that kind of stuff and environmental disturbance and looking at that. But if you can do this at the block scale in the city, where you take 4 of the Solaire buildings and you put them together with one system, that's your best triple bottom line scenario with the cost of water and energy the way they are right now and maintenance and things of that nature. So we have learned from that, and where it's possible, we are actually doing that right now. So we have a number of district scale facilities under construction. So Hallett's Point is one of them by the Durst organization that's under construction right now and starting operations soon. Queens Plaza is a district scale 100,000 gallon a day system serving a building over in Queens. And then Domino, the sugar factory on the East River, is a 5 building system. So a district scale system at 400,000 gallons a day. So we're getting to more district scale scenarios. The challenge there is you have to have stakeholders that may be different owners in different buildings really engaged early and understanding how to share in that infrastructure cost and that maintenance cost is challenging. So getting different owners to buy into the same thing early on is challenging. So, that's a little harder to do. Where you have one owner that has a district, 4 or 5 buildings, it's easier to accomplish. So those are some of the kind of stakeholder engagement items that you really need to plan for early on to get those to happen.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right. Dan has a quick question that I can answer for him. Is there a legal obligation or a financial obligation to maintain operation of the onsite system? And yes, there is. So there's both a regulatory obligation to maintain the system and sampling requirements, and that varies depending on the state or city that you're in terms of what those sampling requirements are. which impacts the cost of maintenance. So as you increase the labor requirements to go in and sample and maintain the system, then those maintenance costs are higher for that operator to go in and do that sampling. So it ranges from 2 days a week up to 5 days a week or more, depending on the area that you're in, which will impact those costs, which all plays into the scale of affordability. So generally, Dan, rule of thumb is the rules of thumb that we gave in terms of greater than $12 per 1,000 gallons for cost of water and sewer, greater than 10,000 gallons a day, all plays into that, making sure that it's economically viable to maintain these systems, to afford to pay for those laborers and on-site sampling requirements, which hopefully continue to improve as our water costs go up, as our technology improves and the sampling requirements go down and the labor requirements go down, then those scales will come down as well. So that's kind of where we are today, depending on where you are. All right.
One quick thing to Samantha regarding the solar industry. We're also looking for projects of scale of a water purchase agreement approach that's analogous to a power purchase agreement. So basically having a system being design, build, own, operate, and finance, and then you could basically be charging for the reclaimed water services as a utility.
Wow. Okay, that's very interesting.
Water is following energy. We're just decades behind.
Yeah. I mean, they are very similar industries. It's pretty interesting to think about.
Yep.
Yeah, please tune in February. You'll probably be interested in that.
Yeah, I have that on my list already. Paid for it. I'll be there.
Fantastic.
Excellent.